Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, in the first topic, we are going to examine the evergreen debate that whether India was a socialist and secular country before the inclusion of such terms in the preamble by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976 under the Indira Gandhi government. Then, in the second topic, we are going to understand what do we mean by biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction treaty and what are the challenges surrounding it. Then, in your simplified section, we will take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide the much important value addition and practice questions, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2025. So, stay tuned. The article today highlights the ongoing debate related to the amendments which were made in the preamble by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976 and the implicit secular and the socialist principle which existed in the constitution before that, which forms an important component of your GS2 paper to actually understand the evolution of Indian constitution. So we'll start our today's discussion by understanding 3 important fundamentals. The first is what constitutes preamble. The second is what preamble looked like on 26th of November 1949, the day of its adoption. And third is how does preamble look now after the changes which was introduced to it by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. So the eminent political jurist N.A. Palkhiwala called preamble as the identity card of the constitution. Why? Because it lists down the nature of our constitution. It also provides the certain objectives which shall be followed by India to achieve as a whole. And third, it also lists down the kind of authority the constitution, like from where the constitution derives its authority actually from. So remember that this preamble was actually drafted on the basis of the objective resolution which was moved in the Constituent Assembly, also drafted by our India's first Prime Minister, who was Jawaharlal Nehru. On which day? On 13th of August 1946. Where he basically defined the nature of Indian state to be independent, sovereign and republic. However, that sparked a kind of a debate in the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly which was created through the Cabinet Mission Plan of 1946. So this debate eventually led to change in this nature of Indian Constitution, ultimately to the sovereign, democratic and republic. The 3 original terms which featured in the preamble as well. Also keep this in mind that this very same objective resolution moved and drafted by Jawaharlal Nehru also contained certain key provisions which actually shaped the nature of our Indian constitution. What were those key provisions? First was the idea to actually provide social justice, to provide equality of status and opportunity, to actually provide equality before law. You guys might be recalling all the articles related to this in our present constitution. To actually provide for freedom of speech, expression, belief, faith and worship, and also to provide adequate safeguards to the minorities. Thus, our constitution and preamble was adopted on the 26th of November 1949. And we celebrate our Republic Day on 26th of January. So why not on 26th of November? Because this date of 26th of January 1950 was held as the first Republic Day as a kind of a symbolism to this date of 26th of January 1930, the day when the first Poon Swaraj Day was celebrated. The Poon Swaraj Day, which was basically kind of derived from the Lahore Resolution of 1929. The Lahore session of Indian National Congress, which was presided by Jawaharlal Nehru himself. So in this particular session, the demand of Indians actually shifted from the earlier demand of dominion status, which was first raised in 1906 Calcutta session presided by Dada Bhai Naroji. Now that demand was being transferred to what? Complete independence. That is why we celebrate our Republic Day on 26th of January 1950 and from that day onwards. Now remember that when this preamble was adopted, it also stated that it derives its authority, the constitution as whole derives its authority from we the people of India. And it defined its nature as the sovereign democratic republic. Thus not including terms like socialist and secular, which were basically added through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976 by the Indira Gandhi government during the imposition of emergency, that was from 1975 to 77. On the basis of this small discussion of 4 minutes, just try to solve this prelims question 2021 and try to understand that how easy it can be if you guys have got your factual knowledge correct. The next question which I'll ponder upon in your mind is that whether there was a kind of a debate which was also taking place in the Constituent Assembly about inclusion of such terms like secular and socialist. The answer is yes. So for example, first of all, let's try to understand what do we mean by this idea of secularism. So if we refer to the historian Ian Copland, he basically states that this idea of secularism started developing in the later medieval Europe, and it basically emphasizes upon the complete disassociation of a state from religion. Thus, the state was not supposed to be involved in any kind of religious institution, religious symbol and religious activity. So that was the original idea. And this was basically a kind of a product of Protestant reformism which was taking place, as well as the Enlightenment period which was shaping the Europe at that point of time. For example, you guys can recall about a book called as Candide, written by the French philosopher Voltaire, where he basically kinds of criticizes the practice of the church and its control over the life of people. So this idea of secularism was also propagated to be included in our Indian constitution, such as for example K.T. Shah, who in the Constituent Assembly on the specific date of 15th of November 1948 actually demanded for the inclusion of this term secular in the Article 1 of the Constitution. Why? To actually guard against any kind of possibility of misunderstanding between the communities, specifically in the kind of a partition order which existed at that point of time. And a similar kind of argument was also given by Brajeshwar Prasad, who said that such terms secularism shall be included to actually tone the morale of the minorities as well. However, there were several people who actually argued against such inclusion of secular. Rather, they emphasized upon the religious cultural heritage of our country, such as for example being H.V. Kamath, who said that we shall adopt the constitution in the name of God himself. However, to which A.T. Pillai argued that do man have the right to not believe in God at first place. For example, you guys can recall the quote of K. Kalappan, who said that no God, no religion, no caste for mankind. So there was that argument as well. Then Rohini Chaudhary had a much witty reply where she said that why not in the name of goddess we shall adopt the constitution. The Supreme Court took a stand when it was discussing under the S.R. Bommai case of 1994 that such term secularism was not included at first place in the constitution. The reason for that was that during that time, during the time of Constituent Assembly, various political jurists actually had the opinion where they equated the term secularism with the Western concept of secularism, which basically kind of exists with antithesis of religion. So the state exists as a kind of an antithesis to the religious practices. The reason for that is what? Because the state has to encompass the various diversity which exists in the society. And that is why Supreme Court also rightly upheld that over a period of time, the India has actually developed its own brand of socialism, that is basically own brand of secularism, which is kind of all encompassing, where the state neither support any religion nor penalizes the practices of any religion. And the Supreme Court also held secularism as the part of the basic structure doctrine under the Indira Gandhi case of 1975 as well as S.R. Bommai case of 1994. Even in today's article, you guys will find a kind of a definition and comparison between the Indian and the Western concept of secularism, where it states that Indian secularism is quite different. How? Because in the Western secularism, what happens that the state and religion, they are strictly separated and the government does not interfere in religious affairs at all. However, in our country, the state actually enjoys the power to regulate the economic, financial, political and secular aspects which are associated with the religious practice. It can also provide for social welfare and certain reforms in religious practices as well. You guys can recall about the abolition of sati for as example. Also, the Indian constitution, there is right to practice any religion. There is non-discrimination on the basis of religion in the affair of the state, which actually embodies our secular value. And thus in our Constituent Assembly, the amendment to introduce the word secular in preamble was not accepted or not emphasized that much. The reason for that is that in our constitution, there exists a kind of an implicit provision of secularism which already existed. For a more clear clarification between the Western and the Indian secularism, just have a quick look at this table. So secularism in West, what does it mean? The state is completely separate from the functioning of religious institution. However, in our country, the state is neutral to all religious group, but not necessarily separating themselves. The state in our country give financial aid to religious institutions and taxes them as well. However, in Western concept, the state treats all religion with kind of an unequal indifference. It does not aid any religious institution through any kind of financial means. Then, in Indian concept, the essence of secularism lies in forging a positive relation between the state and religion. However, in Western concept, the state believes in complete non-interference. And when it comes to in our country, so we do not have a uniform civil code, even though it has been directed under the Article 44 of the Constitution, which is the DPSP. So in our country, there is no uniform civil code. So each and every religion is administered by their personal laws. However, when it comes to the other countries, let's say for example, European countries, there is a kind of a uniform civil code which exists, a single uniform code used to dispense justice regardless of the religious background of the person. So these are the four major differences which you guys can also include in your answers. The idea is that how this concept of secularism, if we refer to the book written by Ranjit Guha, who has written India After Gandhi. So he writes that how this concept of secularism was already imbibed in the provisions of constitution, such as for example Article 40, which provides for what? Equality before law and equal protection of law irrespective of your religion. Article 15, which actually prohibits the state to not discriminate on the basis of religion. Article 25, which actually provides you freedom to profess, practice and propagate your religion. Article 26 provides the freedom to the religious institutions, the religious dominions, to actually manage the institutions, to actually acquire the property. And then there is Article 51A, which is basically the fundamental duty of each one of us to propagate what? Common brotherhood and fraternity. And these same imbibed principles are also reflected in the government of India's initiatives as well. Such as for example, idea of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, the idea of Ek Bharat, Shresth Bharat initiative, or for example, creation of a national foundation for communal harmony which falls under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Then there exists the Religious Institutions Act of 1988, which actually tries to prevent using of these religious institutions for any kind of political purposes so that the communal hatred or hate speech cannot be propagated. You guys can recall about the Dharm Sansad which took place in Haridwar, where the kind of a call of genocide was given against a particular community. So to prevent such kind of things, the Religious Institutions Act of 1988 exists. Then there is a Places of Worship Act 1991, which was in today's news because related to the Sambhal mosque dispute which is taking place. It basically stated that all the places of religious institutions shall actually maintain their character as it existed on 15th of August 1947. Only one exception was provided, and that was to Ram Janmabhoomi dispute, so that there was no spread of any kind of communal hatred through these religious institutions. That was the idea. So now when we have understood the concept of secularism, does there also took place any kind of debate related to the socialist nature of our country? So yes, the idea of socialism, which was derived from the Russian Revolution of 1917, creation of the socialist state in Russia, the adoption of kind of 5-year plan by Stalin the first, which came in the year of 1928, the economic depression which followed in 1929, kind of just disrupting the capitalist economy. So there was much more emphasis on socialism. That can also be seen from the National Economic Plan of 1939, which was created under the chairmanship of Jawaharlal Nehru when Subhash Chandra Bose was the president. The same kind of control, but a limited control of the government on the means of production was also propagated by the Indian industrialist itself under the Bombay Plan of 1944. So there was a kind of an ongoing debate whether India shall be declared as a socialist state. Hasrat Mohani, for example, said that India shall be declared as a union of Indian Socialist Republic or UISR on the model of USSR. Brajeshwar Prasad seconded that, said that India shall be declared as a secular cooperative commonwealth to actually establish socialist order, where we shall try to provide all kind of socialist benefits to the people. Then P.S. Deshmukh kind of took a remark that why we should not also give camel and motorcycle, only that is left to give to the people. B.R. Ambedkar took a staunch defense of declaring India in any kind of a particular economic model, where he stated that the constitution is a living document under Article 368. And when we are declaring our state to be a socialist state, we are basically compromising what? The liberty of people to choose social organization under which they wish to live in. Thus, we are basically kind of violating what? Their Article 21, right to life and right to choice. That is why he said that these socialist principles are already embodied in our constitution, and it is completely unnecessary to accept this amendment to declare our country as a kind of an economic model. That is exactly what has been upheld by Supreme Court as well, where it stated that neither constitution nor preamble mention any specific economic policy to be followed. However, the socialist principles are kind of imbibed in our constitution. They are implicit, such as, for example, Article 38, which actually establishes our country as a welfare state and direct the state to minimize inequality in income, status, facilities and opportunities. How far we have succeeded that? Just look at the World Inequality Lab report of 2024. You guys will get the idea, where 1% of the population is holding 22% of the wealth. That is why the report itself states that now our country has been transformed from colonial Raj or British Raj to billionaire Raj. Then there is Article 39 Clause B, which actually provides for equitable distribution of material resources, and Article 39 Clause C, which said that there shall be prevention of the concentration of wealth and the means of production. Then there is Article 43, which directs the state to secure living wage and decent standard for life for workers. And the government of India's initiatives actually kind of mirror this socialist provision, such as, for example, provision of subsidized ration to almost 75% of the rural population and 50% of the urban population under your National Food Security Act of 2013. Provision of free education up to the age of 14 years under your Right to Education Act 2009. PM Shram Yogi Mandhan, which actually aims to kind of, cater to the needs of the laborers in our country, the workers in our country. Under Ayushman Bharat Yojana, where the government is actually trying to provide you health insurance cover, 5 lakh rupees per family per year. Then there is MG Narega, under which government is trying to create rural employment at the grassroots level, also for the people specifically who are unskilled. Then in your budget 2024, this employment linked incentive scheme was launched by the government, where the government is stating that if, let's say, there is a company who is going to provide you employment, the first salary, there is a certain amount which will be shared by the government as well. Why government is actually trying to do all of this? Because of the idea of Article 38, which establishes ourselves as a welfare state, where we have to first think about the welfare of the people. So even if the provisions of socialist and secular were not added to the constitution, they were already implicit in the other provisions of the constitution itself. Now, what does the inclusion of these terms in preamble actually implies? Does it make a kind of an obligation of the state to follow now? So let's try to understand that debate. So first, the debate started that whether the preamble is part of the constitution or not, because if it is a part of the constitution, it can be amended. If it is not, it cannot be touched at all. So in the Birubari Union case 1960, the Supreme Court held that preamble exists as a key to the mind of the maker of the constitution, but it is not part of the constitution. But then it changed that judgment in Keshwanand Bharti case 1973, the landmark judgment, where it said that preamble is indeed the integral part of the constitution and it can be amended, but subject to the basic structure doctrine, which was laid down in the Keshwanand Bharti case of 1973. And it upheld the same in the LIC of India case 1995. Two key takeaways from this particular discussion is that, one, preamble is neither the source of power to the legislature nor act as a prohibition of power to legislature. And at the same time, it is non-justiciable, which basically means that the provisions of the preamble are not enforceable in the court of law. On the basis of this, just try to solve this question, comment your answers in the comment box. Also try to attempt this mains question and we move forward to the next news, where the article showcases various challenges surrounding the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction BBNJ or High Seas Treaty, which was actually recently signed by the Government of India, an effort which has been appreciated by the international community. And this BBNJ treaty forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment conservation. So let's first try to understand the aims and the provisions of this BBNJ treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of High Seas, which basically aims for conservation and the sustainable use of marine biological diversity. What is marine biological diversity? It is basically the kind of flora, fauna, the microorganisms which basically lives in the sea, and they are essential for our survival. You may ask how? Because for example, this marine biological diversity actually provides for the 50% of the oxygen which we are breathing currently, or they are responsible for 26% of the carbon dioxide extraction from the atmosphere, thus reducing down the global warming. Or they also provide us several other benefits, such as for example preventing the shoreline from any kind of impending disasters, such as for example one cyclone which is currently in development phase in Bay of Bengal. Or we can extract several kind of medical compounds from this marine biological diversity. Remember, this high seas treaty aims to prevent marine biological diversity in which region? In the areas beyond national jurisdiction. To understand which, we will actually be referring to the kind of classification which has been provided to us by the UN clause or United Nations Convention on Law and Seas, which is basically an international treaty which actually provides for kind of legal framework to manage the marine resources. And this particular treaty was adopted in which year? In the year of 1982. So the classification, which has also been asked by UPSC previously in the prelims examination, what is the classification which it provides for the sea, or how it divides the sea? So let's say for example this is the baseline of our country. From that, if we extend to 12 nautical miles or 22.22 kilometer, that basically constitutes our territorial water, which begins at the mean low water baseline and it covers the airspace above as well as the seabed below. Then after that, for another 12 nautical miles or further 22.22 kilometer, we have our contiguous zone, where as a country we exercise the control necessary to prevent our customs, immigrations and other laws. From our baseline till the 200 nautical miles or around 370 kilometer, we have our exclusive economic zone, where we have control over the economic resources including mining and oil explorations, but we cannot prohibit any kind of safe passage to the other countries' vehicles, etc. They can request an extension to their EZ to cover the part of the continental shelf as well. Then beyond this 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers, there starts what? The high seas, which is basically the international waters and beyond national jurisdiction of any particular country. So what basically this BBNJ treaty actually aims for? There are four key components. First is to control or to extract the marine genetic resources and do the equitable sharing of that. This genetic material from marine organism, they can benefit humankind in a variety of ways. Let's say for example the medical compounds which we're discussing. So the new agreement requires the fair and equitable sharing of these benefits. Second is the area-based management tools, which basically includes the marine protected areas. Once implemented, it can actually regulate the human activity in these international waters and help achieve global ocean conservation targets as well. Third is the environment impact assessment, where there will be a kind of a stage-wise evaluations which will be done by the countries to ensure planned human activities in these high seas. Just look at the kind of screening which has been provided. So kind of an initial assessment of the planned activity which can cause any kind of pollution or harmful changes. Or for example, identification in the second stage, there will be key environmental and associated impacts will be calculated, including your human health impacts as well. In the third stage, the planned activities and impacts are assessed and evaluated. The party should fully consider EIA and authorize the activity only if all reasonable efforts has been made to counter any kind of adverse impact. Then in the final stage, there will be measures to prevent, mitigate and manage such potential adverse effect. Permitted activities will be monitored to determine whether they are likely to pollute the environment or not. Fourth important component is capacity building and transferring of this marine technology, specifically from the developed nations to the developing nations. Remember these aims and provisions. So with these aims and provisions, what this treaty is actually trying to fulfill, which objectives? First is to actually increase the protected areas on this high seas. Just look at the amount of fully protected areas which actually exist in these high seas around the world. So this high seas basically consists of 66% of the global ocean, 2/3. Out of which, what percentage of area is covered? 1.4% of area only. Second is, as we heard, the fair and equitable sharing of the marine genetic resources. Just for example, extraction of a medical compound. Through this, it is aiming to achieve 30x30 target, which we have to achieve by 2030 under the Convention on Biological Diversity. The idea is to prevent 30% of terrestrial as well as marine organisms, and the reason by the year of 2030. And it also aims to protect the ecosystem, this marine ecosystem, to stop the carbon leakage, the carbon which has been stored under this sea. So with this, we will also be indirectly, it will be helping us to achieve the target of Paris Agreement as well, correct? To reduce down the temperature below 1.2 degree Celsius. Now, the article today highlights that how this treaty is actually fraught with challenges. What are the challenges? First is that the treaty says that when 60 countries are going to sign and ratify it, only after that the treaty will come into force. How many of the countries till now have actually ratified it? Only 14 out of 104 signatories have actually ratified. Second is obviously when we are saying that there is 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone. But what about those countries which lies within very vicinity of themselves? How they will end up calculating their exclusive economic zone and how they will identify that which area falls in open sea territory for them. That is a major issue. So the dispute over maritime territories, including the regions such as South China Sea, where there already exist overlapping claims that complicate the census on maritime protected areas. Just look at this claim of 9-dash line which is often made by China, which includes the regions such as, for example, the disputes with Philippines, the disputes with Taiwan, Vietnam, etc. in the region of South China Sea. Then there is major kind of an apprehension which exists among the countries, and that is that imposition of such treaty will actually limit the economic opportunities for the coastal communities, because whether they will be allowed fisheries in this open sea region or not. Then there are certain other major challenges. First is that treaty actually emphasizes upon the high seas principle, which is much more focused upon the extraction of marine resources in comparison to the common heritage of mankind concept, which is actually much more focused on the preservation part. Second is obviously what is the key component of this treaty? Sharing of genetic marine resources. So let's for example imagine that there are two countries. One country is power and the other country is prestige. Let's donate both of these countries with S and S. Now this power country is basically a developed nation. A developed nation, so obviously it has kind of large economic resources, large funding capacity. It has made a lot of advancements in the technological field, especially in the extraction of maritime resources. So obviously the idea is that when it will get access to this high seas or the open seas territory, it will extract much more resources in comparison to this underdeveloped nation. So if there does not exist any kind of accountability mechanism, it is obvious that this wealthy nation will benefit more, and it will lead to underreporting of the mining activities by the wealthy nations, how they are doing in the kind of a practice of greenwashing. That will lead to what? Conflict with the provisions of Convention of Biological Diversity. Why? Because this treaties obviously will become disadvantageous to the small island states, underdeveloped states. Then there exists a challenge of capacity building and technology transfer, because the treaty do emphasize upon the sharing of ocean science and resources. However, it has not enforced any kind of mechanism to ensure this technology transfer or the capacity building of these small states. Then it will perpetuate what? Inequality in maritime research and governance. The major issue is that the treaty completely ignores one aspect, and that is that, let's say for example, there is a nation who is trying to extract some resources in the sea. And because of that, let's say for example, any kind of a small hazardous event take place, there is a kind of a contagious maritime ecosystem which exists. So even if a nation has done something in its exclusive economic zone, the hazardous impact can actually infiltrate to the large regions. So that can become an international conflict. Exactly that happened in the Pearl case of Sri Lanka's coast, where there was a ship which was extracting, there was a kind of a leakage of hazardous chemical in the Indian Ocean, which also impacted the fisheries community in our country as well. Then there are certain other challenges, such as for example, the reluctance of the coastal states to actually assume greater responsibility for activities within their water. Then even though this treaty particularly mandates the environment impact assessment, as we saw, it completely remains silent on damaging harms during the oil and the gas exploration, which the pact does not cover at all. and which constitutes an obviously important economic interest of the state. So they have completely left it out, the oil and gas exploration. So the article suggests a kind of a way forward which can be adopted. The first is to bridge the divide, and how we can do that. First, to overcome the structural and the political limitation, there shall be a radical shift towards maritime governance, kind of a governance which actually integrates high seas and coastal regulation into a cohesive framework. Then it suggests that the global south, it needs to need incentives to align their domestic laws with the international norms. And these wealthier nations shall have responsibility to commit to providing technical and financial support, and for that we need to create a kind of an accountability mechanism. So on the basis of this, just try to attempt this particular question and we move forward to the next news, where we'll try to understand what do we mean by the PAN 2.0 or the PAN project 2.0. First, try to understand what is PAN. So PAN is basically a kind of a permanent account number, which is basically what? A 10-digit alphanumeric identification number which has been provided to you. And that is assigned to home to all taxpayers in India, which records what? It records all tax related information for any individual or company. And this PAN card is provided to you by the Income Tax Department under the specific provision of Section 139A of the Income Tax Act of 1961. What are the informations which this PAN card contains? So it basically contains your name. It contains your father or your mother name in the case of, let's say, single parent. It contains your date of birth, the PAN number which we are going to decode, as well as your signature and a QR code which has been provided to you by the government. Now let's try to decode this 10-digit code which is provided to us by the Income Tax Department. So out of the first 5 characters, the first 3 characters which you guys can see here, just take your PAN card in your hand and just try to dissect this. So it represents the alphabetic series which is running from AAA to ZZZ. Then the 4th character which comes, it represents the status of the PAN holder. So for example, if it is P, it is an individual, C for a company, H for Hindu undivided family, A for association of person, B for body of individuals, G for any kind of government agency, J for artificial judicial person, L stands for local authority, F stands for any kind of firm or limited liability partnership, and T stands for trust. Then the 5th character of the PAN, it represents the first character of the PAN's holder's last name or surname, and in the case of a company, it basically represents the first character of the PAN's holder name. Then comes your next 4 characters which are sequential numbers running from 0001 to 999. And the last character, the 10th character, is basically an alphabetic check digit which has been provided by the Income Tax Department. So I hope you guys might be able to understand your PAN card much better now. So this PAN card, remember, it is mandatory for all individuals and companies who pay taxes in India or carry out financial transactions. It is mandatory from them to hold the PAN card. So it is issued to which particular entities? It is issued to any individuals, including the minors, any Hindu undivided family, as we saw, the trust, the society, the company, partnerships, firms or limited liability partnership, to any kind of association of person, or for example the body of individuals, and to even foreigners as well. So if the PAN card is being issued to the foreigners, the question to all of you is that whether PAN card will be considered as a proof of citizenship. Moving to, there are certain cases where the PAN card holding is completely mandatory, such as for example, if you are going to bank and trying to open an account, or you are going to file your taxes, or you are making an application for issue of debit or credit card, you first shall have PAN card. Or if you are purchasing of property or vehicles, here is a trick. The act itself suggests that if you are purchasing any property or vehicle, you shall have mandatory PAN card, but not two-wheeler. Then if you are doing any bank transaction above rupees 10,000, so remember, in most of the cases the PAN card is obviously mandatory. However, there lies certain exception. The exception is that every person who has been allotted PAN based on the enrollment ID of Aadhaar card, application form shall intimate his Aadhaar number to the prescribed authority. So basically the government has said what? That there was an issue by Central Board of Direct Taxes from the June 30, 2023 onwards, which stated that there shall be a mandatory linking of PAN card with Aadhaar card, correct? But there are certain exceptions to this. The exceptions is, first of all, any person who is residing in the state of Assam, Jammu and Kashmir and Meghalaya, or for example you are a non-resident as per the Income Tax Act 1961, or you are above the age of 80 years during the previous year, that is a super senior citizen, or you are not a citizen of India altogether. So in that case, you do not need to link your PAN card with Aadhaar card. So now this debate took place in the court. First of all, there was a Guwahati court. The Guwahati court stated that if you are having an electoral photo identity card, if you are having a PAN card, if you are having bank document or even the land tax paying receipt, with all of this, can you prove your citizenship? The answer is no. So remember that under the rules of the government, there is no particular document which can actually prove your citizenship. So it is completely based upon the various directives given by various courts. For example, the Mumbai court said that voter ID card can be a sufficient proof of citizenship. So there are various kind of arguments, but there is no such provision by the government yet. Remember this. Now, what is PAN 2.0 project which we are looking at? So the government has added actually some new feature. First, it has said that there will be an enhancement of QR code which will take place. Then now the government is going to link the PAN, the permanent account number, with TAN data. What is TAN? Let's try to understand that. So the PAN, it basically enables the income tax department to link various kind of transactions, such as for example tax payment, TDS, your tax collected at source, TCS, all of that. The TAN which we are discussing, it stands for tax deduction and collection account number, which is again a 10-digit alphanumeric number issued by the income tax department itself. But TNA has to be obtained by whom? By the people who are responsible for deducting or collecting tax at source. And it is compulsory to quote TAN in your TDS, TCS return, etc. Now the government is saying that because there was a kind of an ongoing demand by the industry, it is going to upgrade its PAN and it is going to link this PAN and TAN data. And for that purpose, the government is going to provide an online validation service where it will have kind of providing PAN data about the government agencies, private entities, all of that at one place. So all PAN, TAN and TIN data will be clubbed under this system. That will obviously increase the ease of access and delivery. The reason being that if you look at the PAN card which has been issued, 98% of that has been issued to the individuals themselves. It will also lead to weeding down the duplicate PAN cards which exist. So that will obviously be helpful as well. What are the other benefits? So the application and updates will be processed much more quickly. A unified database will promote what? Consistency and prevent errors in the taxpayer information. Current PAN holders are also eligible to upgrade their cards for free of charge. The paperwork will be eliminated via digital procedures, which will encourage sustainability, environment sustainability. You guys can connect it with the life mission. And the platform protects the critical taxpayer data using some reliable technologies of the future. So remember this project PAN 2.0, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to discuss the issue of India's corneal blindness problem, which basically forms an important component of your health sector. So let's first try to understand what is cornea. So this outermost lid which you guys are seeing, that is basically your sclera. And this anterior most part of the eye is basically the cornea which you guys can see here. This cornea, which is basically of 550 microns of thickness. And what does this cornea actually does? What is the function which it performs? It basically protects the structure which exists inside our eye, and it actually provides for the 2/3 refractive power of our eye. And it has a certain involuntary reaction. So for example, if you guys will just take your finger here closely to your cornea, your eyes will ultimately close down. Why that happens? Because there is a connection to unmyelinated nerve which ending subtle to wave any kind of field, temperature or the chemicals. This corneal blindness which we are discussing, just look here. This is the cornea with, this is your normal cornea which exists. Just look at the kind of abnormalities which can occur in this cornea. This is your keratitis. What is keratitis? So basically the corneal blindness which exists, it exists because of the various kind of infections which take place in cornea because of bacteria, fungi, viruses and protozoa. This keratitis is basically any kind of bacteria or pathogen which impacts the cornea. There are other reasons as well, such as for example, if you're not happy with your natural eye color, you are using those frequent eye lenses, or any kind of actually post-traumatic stress disorder can lead to that as well. then there is the magnitude of problem which we are going to assess. So remember that this corneal disease is actually responsible or act as a primary cause of blindness among the less than 50 years old people, and the secondary cause of blindness for the people who are more than 50 years old. Currently in our country, there exist around 1.2 million cases, thus making our country one of the largest population with corneal blindness. Just read here that how the cornea is the clear tissue covering in the front of eye, which can get damaged due to multiple factors. It is, for example, cancer, injury, infection, and poor nutrition as well. Now, the issue is that such cornea is actually treatable. So, corneal transplant surgery is an effective intervention. And for that purpose, there shall be enabling of an eye bank which actually handles ethically sourced corneas, process them and makes them available to the eye surgeons who can actually do this transplantation. But in our country, there does not exist enough eye banks of the necessary standard. So the requirement is at least 50 high functioning eye banks. Currently we have around 12 to 14 in our country right now, and at least 500 active corneal surgeons which can perform 200 transplants on average every year. So with appropriate legislation, the report suggests that it can enable us to actually target or achieve the target of 1 lakh corneal transplants a year. However, if we look at the reason for drop in the eye donations which has taken place, there are several reasons for that. First is because there was a kind of a halt in eye banking which took place during the time of pandemic. There is understaffing which is taking place. There is not enough hospitals, or there are various people who are fearful of getting the infection from the other person, right? So the idea is that one major issue which exists in our country, that is of the required request. Required request is basically that unless and until, let's say for example, if I am not going to donate my cornea after my death, then there will not be availability for the other person. In our country, because of the various religious, social taboos, unawareness, many of the people are actually hesitant of donating their cornea. So the today's article actually dwells in and discuss about the concept of presumed consent. What is presumed consent? So the presumed consent is basically based upon universal opt-in policy, where it is presumed that unless and until the deceased has not left behind a very specific not to donate instruction, the presumed consent as a tissue donor. So I am presuming that if you have not specifically said no to donation of your cornea will be taken, right? Now, the report suggests that it has certain advantages, such as, for example, it can eliminate red tapeism. It can actually curb down the wait for postmortem examinations which take place. It can actually reduce down the effort of convincing the next of kin. But there are certain issues which prevails as well. Why? Because first of all, it is violating the consent. The consent, which is a kind of an integral right of your Article 21 right to life. So you should choose whether you want to donate or not. That is voluntary donation by public. Then there is a kind of a relationship which exists between this public donor, the corneal specialist which facilitate the transaction with skill, and the policy maker which backs such transaction with appropriate legislation. Now there are several experts who has been actually vouching for this presumed consent, because currently India follows an opt-in system for harvesting any organ, including tissue like cornea, from deceased donor, meaning the patient and their family members have to provide the consent to such donation. The article suggests that the ideal way forward can be to adopt the global model, where the countries with the best adoption rate, such as for example Spain, USA and Portugal, they actually focus upon soft opt-in policy or required request policy. What is this soft opt-in or required request policy? So that basically is where a hospital cornea retrieval program or HCRP is done. In an HCRP, a grief counselor approaches the kin. So let's say for example, if I am dead, there is a kin of mine, you are an HCRP officer, you will come, you will try to convince him. How? Initiate a conversation, gently motivating them to consider a donation, try to make them aware. The donation is processed only after receiving explicit consent from the kin. And for that purpose, these global countries, what they are doing investments in public education and investments across the cornea transplantation pipeline. So don't you think there is a kind of a dearth of awareness about this organ donation concept in our country? And for that purpose, there shall be a large scale awareness program which shall be run. Please comment your answer or your opinion that how we can actually take some innovative steps in this direction. Think like a future bureaucrat. We move forward to the next news, where we'll try to understand what is European Union Digital Market Act, which has come in the news, specifically keeping in mind its provision for the upcoming prelims examination. Before that, just a quick overlook at what constitutes European Union. European Union, which is basically a cohesive political and economic bloc of 27 countries. The 27 countries which you guys can see here, just do not look at United Kingdom because the Brexit has taken place in 2020. It has exited. So, a question to all of you, does all these European Union countries, they use euro as official currency? The answer is no. Euro as an official currency is only used by 19 countries. There are still 8 countries which do not use euro as their official currency, such as for example Romania, Poland, Hungary, Denmark, etc. Then the formation of this European Union started specifically after the backdrop of the World War II being over with the Treaty of Paris 1951, which basically established European Coal and Steel Community 1952. Then the Treaty of Rome 1957 was formed, which created your European Economic Community. The formal establishment took place through the Maastricht Treaty of 1992. Maastricht is basically a city in Norway. Remember that this European Union constitutes majorly a population of around 450 million. The country in European Union with the largest population is Germany, with the lowest population is Malta, and currently it has a GDP of around $19 trillion, which basically constitutes 1/6 of the world's GDP. So when we have understood the European Union, let's try to understand what was its digital market. So the idea was that the European Union actually wanted to conserve the data which was being generated by their people, and for that purpose it actually brought an act to create a kind of a system to control the gatekeepers. Who are gatekeepers according to the act? The gatekeepers are basically those large companies which actually control the various internet activities being performed by the citizen. Such as for example the companies which act as service provider or search engine, which act as app platforms, or they control some kind of social media such as for example your TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. If you look at intermediation, Google Maps, Google Play, etc. The companies which run ads like Google and Amazon, messaging companies like WhatsApp and Messenger, video sharing like YouTube. So what were the rights which were provided to their citizen? It actually provided their citizen the choice of digital services, where the citizen can now install their preferred apps directly from the web or alternative app stores as well. So it kind of tried to dilute the monopoly by these large players, the big fours. It also provided the citizen the data ownership. It stated that now you have more control over your personal data. You have the power to decide whether companies can use your data over the different services or not by sending you that message that do you agree. How many times you guys have read it? You will be just clicking on I agree on everything only. Then there is a seamless data portability which has been provided. The streamlined access as well as unbiased search results, which basically means what? That your search result will reflect relevance, not biases. So it will not create a kind of an echo chamber on you. These days you guys will just search on one reel of any motivational speaker. Next morning you'll be flooded with such motivational speakers. So much motivation that you have stopped studying only. Then comes the right of the company. So let's have a quick look at that as well. First is the app distribution, where a kind of an unlock closed ecosystems has been provided. So now the companies has the right to run your own app store, distribute your apps through alternative app stores as well. You can actually communicate directly and freely with your customers. You don't need a particular platform to reach to the larger customer. Second is that it will actually ensure a kind of a fair play, where the data which is being generated by your business on any kind of a big tech platform won't be used by them to outcompete you. Third is it will actually provide effective access to your data. How? By generating your services or user interaction on gatekeeper platforms, including any kind of performance metrics. You are equipped to make informed decisions as well. It will provide for fair sales term, fair ranking among these competitive entities, as well as interoperability of data as well. The question which you guys shall ask is that does India have a similar kind of act in our country? The answer is yes. That is Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023, which basically put emphasis on data localization or storing of critical data, that is basically personal data within the dominion of our country. However, the non-personal data can be shared. So what we have done, we have provided safeguard to the user data from any kind of third-party processor. The Data Protection Board Authority has been created to summon, examine and recommend sanctions for any kind of data breaches. Minor consent has been provided, that means guardian approval for processing data of minors and physically disabled. Appoint DPO, that is basically stands for Data Protection Officer, for enhanced transparency. To control the transfer of data which is being exported from our country to other countries. To alert for any kind of breach of data. Hefty penalties up to 250 crore has been provided for any kind of severe breach of data of our country, and fair appeal tribunals has been created as well. Just look at a kind of a quick in succession about the digital protection data which was kind of created. So the kind of chronology it followed, first of all, it started with K.S. Puttaswamy judgment of Supreme Court, which actually upheld right to privacy as an integral part of right to life and liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution. Then there was Sri Krishna subcommittee related to this Personal Protection Act, Personal Data Protection Act of 2018, which recommended some suggestions. So it was introduced finally in Lok Sabha and then approved and come as a act in your 2023. On the basis of this discussion, just try to solve this particular question which has actually come repeatedly in the prelims examination. So just try to see from which article the right to privacy is being derived, and we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to have a quick overlook at India's Thumba launch of 1963. The Thumba launch, from where in the year of 1963, the first rocket from India was actually launched into the space, and that took place on November 21, 61 years from now, where the first Thumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station, which is basically in Tiruvananthapuram in Kerala, was established. Where what was the first launch which we did? We actually launched an American-made Nike Apache carrying a French payload. And now this same Thumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station is also known as Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. Vikram Sarabhai, who is called as the father of Indian space program. Why Thumba was actually chosen to launch this rocket? This effort which was done by our scientists years back with the limited resources possible. You guys can also quote this in your financial propriety in your ethics paper. So the reason Thumba was chosen because it was very close to our magnetic equator. Now, the ISRO was established in the year of 1969, and remember, the first satellite which India launched officially was in 1975. The satellite's name was Aryabhat, the same Aryabhat who actually calculated the value of pi to its accuracy, who actually was the first one to calculate the rotation of Earth on its axis, and almost calculated that to complete one rotation, to complete one revolution around the sun, Earth actually takes 365.25 days. Also, this Aryabhat satellite was launched on Soviet Union satellite using the Cosmos 3M rocket. Now it has been in the news recently because the New Space India Limited, NSIL, it actually launched a 4,700 kg GSAT N220 satellite on board on SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Florida, which is basically the first satellite on board a SpaceX rocket. Why it was launched abroad and not on an India launch vehicle? Because the weight of this satellite, that is 4,700 kg, exceeded the payload capacity of the country's most powerful rocket, and that is LVM-3, which can actually place the satellites weighing up to 4 tons in the geostationary transfer orbit. Note this down for your prelims examination, because we were unable to launch it on our satellite, and that's why we had to use SpaceX. Then what is this N2 satellite? It is basically a Ka-band high throughput communication satellite which has been built by ISRO to enhance broadband services in underserved areas, especially including in the Northeast, Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep. And that will also support services like in-flight internet connectivity and our smart cities missions as well. Beside this, there are certain other missions on which ISRO is focusing upon. One of them is PSLV C-59 mission, which is bearing the European Proba 3 mission. The Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle will fly in its extended length configuration. What is this Proba spacecraft? It is basically being launched by the European Satellite Commission to study the sun, just like how we have launched our Aditya L1 mission as well. Then there is also the training which our Indian astronauts are taking place. As for example, Shubhanshu Shukla, who is set to fly to the International Space Station in 2025 and is currently under the training at European Space Agency's European Astronaut Center. Beside this, the article today actually highlights the various kinds of innovative satellites or missions which are being to be launched by our private firms, thus putting impetus on the private sector in the space. So just for example, there is Pixel, the Pixel which is actually going to launch 6 hyperspectral satellites which will eventually create a constellation of 24 satellites. And what will be the application of that? It will provide us spatial data through which we'll be able to detect crop diseases, water stressed areas, real-time deforestation and ocean pollution. Then there is Galaxy Space, which is basically creating a kind of an orbital platform where the onboard instruments can run various kind of experiments in the space. Third is Hex-20, which is launching Neela satellite, which is basically a CubeSat which will provide data processing services. Then there is Catalyst Space, which is launching SRO satellite, which will be able to launch a kind of a small satellite launch vehicle. Then there is Aka Space Studio, which is basically creating a space analog mission currently in Leh and Ladakh, training the astronauts there in the region of isolation. Then there is SatSure, which is basically creating an auto image feature extraction model for building roof, roads and classes for 2 lakh villages. And in today's article, it is highlighted that how it is Indian government's largest program to map the rural poverty. So just remember these important private sector space initiatives which are being undertaken, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are actually going to read about an interesting hypothesis which has been proposed in today's article. But before that, let's first have a quick overlook at our 2 distant planets, the 2 distant gaseous giants, and that is Uranus and Neptune. Uranus is basically the 7th from the sun, and it is basically composed of water, ammonia and methane, where because of its axial tilt, it gets 42 years of continuous satellite and then 42 years of continuous darkness. When we talk about the largest planet in our solar system is Jupiter, followed by Saturn, and Uranus is the 3rd largest planet which we have in our solar system, where it basically contains what? The ring system and magnetosphere. And the major moons of Uranus is basically your Miranda, Titania and Oberon. And remember that Uranus is one of the 2 planets which actually rotates in clockwise direction. Can any one of you name the second one? The second planet which we are going to discuss is Neptune, the last planet, the 8th and the farthest known planet, feeling sad for Pluto. It is currently 4th largest in the size, densest giant planet, and remember it is not visible to the unaided eye. And its atmosphere is majorly consists of hydrogen and helium. What does the today's news article basically emphasize upon? It suggests that as per a new simulation, there might be an ocean of water inside these 2 planets, that is Uranus and Venus, right? So the hypothesis explains that the strange magnetic field of both of these worlds, which are unlike any other in the solar system. So when we talk about the magnetic field, the Earth magnetic field is generated in its core, and that produces what? A clear north and south pole known as a dipole that roughly aligns with the axis of planet. Correct? So that is also true for other planets like, for example, Jupiter, Saturn and some of the moons of Jupiter as well. However, the magnetic field of these 2 planets are hugely tilted and off from the center of the planet. So unlike our Earth, how we have a kind of a center magnetic field, north and south pole, the kind of magnetic field which exists at Uranus, that is kind of slightly tilted. Now when the scientists, they model the interiors of these 2 ice giants and suggest that there is a layer of water which is around 8,047 kilometers thick. And this ocean would have a pressure of that is around 60,000 times greater than that of the Earth's surface. So obviously it will behave more like a supercritical fluid, with a combination of a gas and liquid than like water on Earth. So crucially, this water would be separated like oil and water from a carbon rich layer below that actually divides the ocean from each planet's core, and that is responsible for the tilted magnetic field which the Uranus has. So just keep this information in your mind, and with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation guys, and thank you.